Hi everybody, how are we all doing today? This is chapter 20 and we're going to look at a gene revolution. We're going to try to look at the idea of genetically engineered food and how it pertains to possible world hunger. So while we're going to look at some of the what genetically engineered food entails and what that means, we're also going to look at it as an idea to global food security, populations, and how this is affecting access to food, and to help ensure that there is enough food around the planet for us to feed everybody on the planet, and those resources are being shared as they are a necessity of life. Unlike things like oil and your electronics and things like that, we simply, literally, biologically cannot live without food, yes, and water, of course. So these are coming down to some of the real basic ideas in environmental science and sustainability. We want to think about sustainability. How do we sustain a biological population, including animals and plants on the earth? Okay, if we need this stuff to live, literally live, without this stuff, there would be no human beings or human population as we know it. So hopefully by the end of this chapter, you'll be able to understand that there are basic nutritional requirements for human health, that there are problems with poor nutrition, and that these issues are located around the world. In addition, there's also some benefits and drawbacks of this idea of the green revolution and some of the strategies that we're doing to help enhance the global food production, and what are some new traits that are being introduced in this idea of a genetically modified organism. Okay, so a little bit of background. In the United States, many of the families here spend about less than 20% of their income on food. Now, if you've ever gone out to dinner with your friend or loved one or boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever, and you thought that the food was probably overpriced, or you walked through the supermarket and you say to yourself, man, I can't believe how much this food costs. Well, think about this then. 20% of our income is spent on food. And a lot of times I ask people, well, think about this. How much is that overpriced cup of Starbucks coffee or whatever it is that you're eating or drinking? And ask yourself, well, how much did it cost for that to end up on your plate or in your house or literally in your stomach, if you want to think of it in those terms? I mean, really, how much did it cost? These animals and plants that we're eating and drinking have to be raised somewhere, processed, delivered with trucks and fuel and cooked and all this other stuff that ends up on your plate. So when you think about 20% of our income, well, we can see if that you think that's a lot or not. Okay, in some poorer parts of the world and in parts of Africa, that number rises from about 50 to 75% of the percentage of income spent on basic sustenance itself. So when the prices double, okay, there can be an even more unrest or inaccessibility for those people who can't afford the food, who have to spend larger amounts of their income to get this food, and therefore political unrest or even riots can result. In places where there are shortages and droughts based on natural disasters and things that foster pest infestations or major storms that wipe out huge access to crops and edible food, then that supply is actually going to go down, and therefore the yield goes down and could cause the demand to go up. If we simply have less stocks of corn to feed X amount of people, then those stocks of corn will become more valuable and cost more, and therefore those who can't afford it won't be able to get the corn that they need, and so on and so forth. And that then, of course, leads to political unrest and everything that goes with a social society. All right. So what about this? Okay, what about this? Well, if inaccessibility is an issue based on crops and cost of the cost for these crops, well, then how does this relate to the food accessibility around the world, especially in nations and areas that people can't simply afford the crops that they need? Well, approximately 925 million people worldwide don't have access to enough food to fully meet their nutritional needs. What does that mean? That means malnourishment. Malnourishment is basically ones who cannot get enough basic sustenance to have their basic human bodily operations to perform satisfactory. So they don't have enough vitamins and minerals and calciums and things like that to get their basic life stand life operations for their body to be able to beat their hearts and blink their eyes and breathe their lungs and the things that we do in order why we eat to get energy. Okay, so most of these people are living in developing countries and they're chronically malnourished or undernourished, and they're not just victims of single events. We have to look at how multiple events, seasonal, long events of drought or political unrest can cause famine in other places around the world. And it's not just political unrest. We all know that the major disasters, such as the Haitian earthquake in 2010, and their deforestation issues going on in the country are leading to some things that are increasing the availability of good food to fewer people. Pakistan has rising food prices based on unemployment and government forces. Sudan has droughts and civil wars. There's extreme weathers and heat waves going on in some of the African countries. And, there's political unrest, very harsh winters, long dry summers, and overall global climate change that's proliferating some of these, intense storm intensities and periods of drought longer because of the underlying issues associated with climate change, which we will see at the very end of the course as a culmination of our work. So in this data, though, we can see here that there's many areas that are considered to be major populations of undernourishment. And these are just some of the areas that we're looking at, and this graph down here can show you that the darker red areas of greater than 35% of the populations in these particular years here were considered to be undernourished. So if you can imagine, 1 in 3 or so people were considered to be malnourished. Now, interestingly, behind this gray box, you can look carefully, and you can see South Florida and everywhere else in here. In our country, typically is not considered having a malnourishment issue. In fact, some argue it is the other way, which we'll see a little bit later. So who studies this, and how do we know this, and what is this malnourishment all about? Well, world hunger is a bit decreasing, and malnutrition rates are decreasing a bit, but they're still unacceptably high. And the reason why they are decreasing a little bit but still high is because population dynamics are still growing in many places where this is an issue, and B, political and social constructs and unrest in these countries can bar access to foods and prevent imports and exports and things like that. So it's not just as easy as to look at it as a function on how much can a country produce in terms of food, and how big is their population, and how much money do they have to be able to purchase this food. Okay, so the idea here is that the United Nations also looks into things such as malnourishment, but that is also a function of quality and quantity of the food. So imagine if you can have as much ramen noodles as you could possibly want. Well, ramen noodles is not exactly a very nutritious food, and you'll be missing out on a lot of the healthy things that you might need, although it is very cheap. Right? So when quality or quantity is insufficient, nutrition is poor, and people can become susceptible for diseases. And then these diseases can lead to many permanent maladies such as blindness and death. So this can be translated across populations and demographics in particular areas. And in fact, malnourishment can affect about 1.5 billion people, and also could lead to things absolutely like obesity. So you're going to say, well, how can malnourishment lead to obesity? Overeating. Well, no. That's not what's happening. Malnourishment is the quality of the type of the food. If you overeat in products of food that is very low in quality and high in things that we don't need, like plenty of extra fats and things like that, we can lead to malnourishment. Okay, so it's not just being underfed. It could be overfed with the wrong stuff, such as my ramen noodles example. Okay, those can lead to, like I said, diabetes or type 2. If you have more interest in those type of things, you want to look into more some of the nutritional sciences, medical sciences, medicine. If you want to become a doctor and look at this stuff, or even a master's in public health, will help you understand a little bit more about this in depth. In our course, this is just an overview. Okay. But still, nonetheless, we can understand that nutrients and calories are not the only contributors to hunger crisis, as we mentioned. Political unrest, and ecological degradation factors such as the decreasing abundance or production levels of a certain tract of agricultural land. So if a stand of corn can no longer produce as potent of a product of corn, then that farmer has an issue, because if it could produce 100,000 bushels a season and now can only produce 50,000 bushels a season, well, we have some food security issues going on there. Less food, whether it's feed corn or it's sweet corn or whatever it is for us to eat corn on the cob or something, things are happening to that particular farmer and the tract of food that it is supporting. Okay? So, that being the case, we can look at a few things, just a couple of examples, for example, of what is found in foods, things that we might need. We all know at this point that vitamins and minerals are essential for us to grow up healthy and strong, and we do. But for example, vitamin A is something that is super important, found in many foods, if you don't get enough vitamin A, you could be vitamin A deficient. Okay, and these could be having problems with vision, leading to blindness. It could be problems with your immune system, being able to fight off diseases. Okay, that's why they always say eat your carrots and make sure you get good vision, that kind of thing. But supplements can be used. Okay, can be brought into the food chain to help us achieve a good source of vitamin A, and it could lead to different types of crops being genetically engineered to produce high vitamin A. Another one, for example, is iron. We all know iron. If you have iron deficiency, you might have something called anemia, which is your red blood cells' ability, or inability, I should say, to carry oxygen through the lungs into your cells. And approximately 4 to 5 billion people suffer from iron deficiency, including pregnant women. In addition, iron is even more important for women who have their monthly cycles, which cause them to lose some iron. But however, the meat is a good source of iron, as well as spinach and legumes and grains. And you can look through some of these other things such as iodine and zinc, and conduct an analysis of what are you eating and are you getting the right things. If you have any questions, certainly do not use this presentation as a way to understand your particular intake of vitamins and minerals. Okay, of course, go see your doctor and nutritionist to make sure that you are on a healthy diet and you're getting what you need. This is just a primer to introduce you to a bit of the issues surrounding malnutrition and food deficiency from around the world. So there are some things that are being done, though. There are this term is a green revolution. This green revolution was a revolution to really spawn the number of productivity of agriculture to make sure that we are feeding or making enough product, really grow enough product, make enough product, process enough product to feed people around the world. So as the global populations rose and agricultural productivity stalled because the land can only give so much, then there had to be this international community effort to bring agricultural techniques up to par in order to help feed the populations. Okay, this was led by the United Nations, all right, and people in countries around the world got together and said, "This is a problem. How can we fix it?" And they start to work on things like modern uses of pesticides, methods of irrigations, fertilizing, access of these things to developing countries, shipping strategies and global logistical management of food stores, and also healthy consumption of food efforts around the world. You can see from this graph that down here, sorry, I flipped the slide, but it's the same graph. You can see down here that basically this red line here shows production in millions of tons of worldwide grain, okay? And we can see that it leveled off a little bit here in the 80s, and then it kind of shot back up as we kind of re-engineered how to grow products. The blue area down here is the area harvested. Now, interestingly enough, you can see that the blue area has actually declined a little bit in terms of millions of hectares or square area of land dedicated and used for farming and growing of grain. Now, how can we have an increased production of the amount of grains when we have a fairly stable, yet slightly less area of grain production? Well, enter into genetically modified products and plants or grains, okay? And so what they have done is engineered products to make them grow faster, grow more abundant, grow larger, right? Grow bigger, if you will. Okay, so these are the kind of things that were being done in terms of genetically modified foods, and there are pros and cons to each of these things. So what is this idea then? Genetically modified foods really apply to this concept of a cash crop, because a cash crop is where the farmers make their money. Okay, and that's really what they're trying to do. Yes, they are feeding you, but they are also giving you a product in which they receive money for, and many of them receive a lot of large government grant money to be growing food for us. Okay, so it's a cash crop, and what we want to do, and just like any business or any economy, we want to make the best product we can as cheaply as we can and maximize our profits. So imagine if I have one plant that produces grains of X amount of grain value, but I could use the same land area and double my product. Well, I've just reduced my overall operating expense, right, and increased my product, therefore lowered my bottom line, making more profits for my pockets, and hence I'm a richer farmer. Well, how do we do that? Okay, how can we make this stuff a more productive product or plant or animal? All right, it's a highly controversial methodology. Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are part of the genetically modified food production. Okay, one way in which we do this, or I don't, but the geneticists and agriculturalists do, is by looking at a gene revolution. Okay, basically, for example, a product is introduced with a specific gene, and that gene might be a pest-killing toxin. All right, and so if you're over here and you have this pest-killing toxin, you bring it in the laboratory, and then you isolate that DNA section to find the area of that DNA that's solely responsible for creating the toxin that kills off, say, for example, a certain pest. And they can do this. Okay, they're very, very, very smart people, and they can go into do organism genotyping, and they can figure out what we're made of. It's really, really cool stuff. They can look at our DNA and chemically extract it, and then they go in the lab and they make copies of this thing. So they have a whole vast vials and vials of copies of these small, tiny, tiny DNA. Look, you can't even see these things with your own eye. They're so small. It goes all through, basically use chemistry, okay? But what you can do is you can take that part of the gene, if it's partly targeted to make a toxin, stick that into a bacterial cell, then take that bacteria cell with the plasmid, okay, which contains the gene to create the toxin, which is a string of chemicals in and of itself, insert that into a particular plant nucleus, and therefore whenever that plant undergoes mitosis and meiosis, and that plant cell reproduces and splits and reproduces, it's constantly going to replicate the DNA and make this particular toxin part of that plant cell's nucleus and essentially that plant cell's DNA. Then we go ahead and we take those little plant cells, and they're in a seed, and you plant the seeds and they grow, and now the entire plant has all of these gene-producing toxins that grow into this plant. Now, what does that mean? That means that when these things grow up and pests try to go and get and land on them and eat this crop, so like pests do, they'll eat the corn like we want to eat the corn, but it will eat the corn also, like locusts and things like that. When they eat that, they die because that toxin is toxic to those pests. So what do they do? What happens? The pests no longer will eat them. Okay? The pests aren't stupid. They learn really quick that, hey, if I eat this, I'll die. And so they will no longer eat this product with this gene in there. Well, how do we get this gene in there? Well, we saw one way of doing that through genotyping, through chemistry, biochemistry. Really, really cool stuff. However, we can also spray herbicides on things like that to make it safe for the plant, but toxic, or I should say, not very good for the surrounding little plants that want to, like weeds that go around it that will kill the weeds and which will rob the oxygen and nutrients needed for the crop. Therefore, they can grow bigger and stronger. We can also put them through the process of selective planting, right? Which is where the farmer only selects the pieces of grains that are the biggest and baddest and keeps those seeds and destroys the rest, literally burns the rest or whatever. And therefore, over time, only has a batch of those seeds that will grow big and strong. Okay, that can be applied to salmon, to pigs, to grain, to corn, to whatever. I don't know. Maybe someday. Human beings? Who knows? Okay. So there's some advantages, I mean, there's an herbicide tolerance. You can spray this thing on a product that will control the weeds around it, making it very much easier to get to harvest and more efficient. But what are the disadvantages? Well, more herbicides may be used because they don't hurt the crop, but they could then potentially leak into the water supply. The farmer is then locked into using the herbicide as a crop, and then the crop could be tolerant, and the weeds could become tolerant. So they'll have to rechange the type of herbicide to now destroy the new weed, and then that will become, so it's a never-ending cycle. And then the company producing the seed could have a lock on that particular seed, all right? So they could say, look, I'm the only one that has seeds that's going to grow this big and strong. If you want my seeds that are going to grow big and strong like this, you can have them, but I'm going to charge you triple what the other guy's going to get. But your other guy's only going to get you a third of the production. So you do the math and you tell me what you want, okay? There's also the idea of pest resistance. It's a great idea to have a pest-resistant product because we won't be worried that locusts will come in overnight and eat all of our corn, and the farmer will come out the next day and our food will be gone. However, these pests, just like the weeds, can become resistant to this over time, just like we have antibiotics, right? We take too many of them, and things that affect us can now become resistant. The crops may repel some beneficial insects that are pollinating the product and spreading the pollination chemicals around to let the product increase its yield by nature, and relying therefore then on the farmer. And then some secondary pests may be not effective. I know that's bad English, but what I mean is the initial pests, who may eat other pests, will no longer be there to eat the mosquitoes or the gnats or the fly eggs or something. And so therefore you can have an infestation of secondary bugs that you didn't even know you were going to have. All right. The other idea is corporate funding. Okay, corporations have a very big interest in trying to develop GMO products because, again, it's a higher yield for smaller product, even though the stuff is all very expensive, but it's very economically calculated. Okay, these corporations know what they're doing in order to make the most money and produce the best yield for the product. Okay, but then again, the price of seeds are going to go up. The GMO process could be proprietary. It could cause some more usage of natural resources to do some new packaging or some new harvesting methods or something. And it could accidentally cross-contaminate fields, especially when they do crop rotations. And if not done carefully enough, could infect, previously unwanted areas of the land, such as forest creeping or agricultural spread in deforestation. Okay, and if you can see from this picture up here, GMOs can also leach into what's called the organic section of foods, which are treated with nothing and are totally grown without anything produced in terms of genetic modifications, and unintended consequences could occur. And then it could come to your dinner plate, and how do you know, right? Unless it's stamped on there by the USDA, you just don't know. And really, what it comes down to, okay? Unless you're a food nutrition biologist or biochemist and can do the test on your own dinner food, you got to trust the people behind it, the FDA, the USDA, the governments involved, the farmer associations, the companies, and hey, are they being truthful to you? Well, that's what you got to decide. And that what comes down to looking at your own diet and seeing what you're bringing in into your bodies, into your tables, and come back and think about it again from full circle. Is what you're eating and what you're buying in terms of food, is it really expensive? Can you go to a fast food chain and get an entire super meal for $6.99? You probably can, right? That is an amazingly low price for what it is that they're giving you. Think of those products, where they had to grow and how long they had to grow and how they were processed and shipped and brought and trucked and prepared and baked and cooked and fried and heated and whatever else by employees who come in and do this, and then shipped right to you on a tray in a little plastic bag. And sometimes it's got a little cool little kids meal product in there that they can flip around. And everyone goes home full and happy. But how nutritious was the food, right? One of the things that I wanted to bring up that the chapter misses, not really misses, but just to dwell on it for a second, there are some severely large issues that some people feel, some doomsdayers, if you will, or conspiracy theorists feel is even larger, and that is the idea of the global food security. The idea that oil is not really our issue. It's food and water and those resources that we need to live, and that in fact places are going to become not just politically unset in areas of the world that are have limited access to quality foods, but that's going to cause a supply and demand and a whole chain of global events dedicated and could have implications, including military involvement and things like that. So just to give you a heads up, there are places you can go that are some great resources. The U.S. Department of State has a global food security website, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies has a global food security project. Both pretty reliable resources for you to see kind of the political, socio-political side, not necessarily dwelling on the nutritional side, although that certainly is part of it, but it really is kind of looking at the global political and economic impact of food security and food availability around the planet. Because when you think about it, we all are there and we all have to eat. There's no question about it. We just have to eat, or else we'll expire. And that's the challenge of meeting the nutritional needs of an entire population. But there's something you can do. There's definitely ways you can have to impact those facing food insecurity, and it's through education and financial support. You can go and work at food banks. You can go store food and donate cans. You can look in and talk to your farmers and get into agricultural. There's a big eco emphasis in our department here, and if you want to go talk to some people, I can point you in the right direction. You can also plant your own vegetable garden, and have an inside little garden planted in like 2-liter bottles. You can put like basil and herbs and stuff right in your kitchen windows. But try have your hand at growing some cucumbers and some lettuce and things at your own vegetable garden, or take part in a victory garden, which were called victory gardens because they were spurred in World War I and II, basically to grow vegetables so that the larger food demands could be shipped overseas. For the people fighting in the war, and that the local victory gardens were used to feed the local neighborhoods of the country. So there was an emphasis there, and you can do your own. And I encourage you to see if there are some local gardens or local places that you can grow and harvest your own stuff. And of course, you can make a monetary donation to an international nonprofit, or you can go to UNICEF, or even help out at a collection agency or a program, especially around Thanksgiving and the holidays. These things seem to come on everybody's mind even more, although it is a year-round thing. So take a look if you'd like. And if you're really getting into it, you can organize a group with your parents, community leaders, or educational professionals, or people you're working with to talk about what does it mean for school children to have lunch or access to healthy foods. Do you think it's a good thing to have soda machines in a school if the school is making some good money off of it? These are some of the questions that are facing in school institutions, parent-teacher involvement kind of questions, kind of thing, right? And ultimately, it comes down to really policy change. If you're one of those who are politicians, politically oriented. You can look at how GMOs may be part of a solution because of the increased crop yields around the world. But they do cause some super unintended consequences. So you can contact your local and federal representatives to discuss your positions in testing and what's going on in like your own backyard or how it's affecting you or your neighborhood. Especially if you come from another country outside the United States, you can kind of take a trip down there, see what they're doing down there, and see if there's anything that you can do. This basically sums up the chapter. This kind of crazy image right here just reminds you, look, it is not a frivolous discussion. It is a very, very serious discussion about the availability of food. That is not something we can go without. Food is something we need. And so do all of the plants and animals around the planet. They all need food and water to grow, and we need food and water to live. And we can get along and help each other share and get our fair amount of food that we all need. There's plenty of food to go around the world if done correctly. We just have to make sure it's reaching everybody, and everybody can get fed well and with quality food. If you have any other questions, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Send me an email, no problem. And hope you enjoyed this session. I'll talk to you soon.